feel like pride is something that attacks like pastors so much because if you let pride kind of sneak into your life as a pastor, then you're not going to want to listen to anyone except yourself. Okay, so right before we pressed record, you almost did something to my laptop. What did you do?
Yes, I did.
What did you do?
So, for those of you watching on YouTube right now, I have a basketball in my right arm. I'm kind of taking the Jalen Rose approach today. I know you don't know who that is. Basically, he is a broadcaster that holds a basketball every time he's on TV. I think it's hilarious. But I figured for me, since I moved so much, maybe it would help to hold on to something during the episode today. But before we started recording, I was, shooting it, practicing my form, and I almost hit my water off of the coaster here and almost landed on your laptop. And I hate to say that wouldn't be the first time that I almost broke a computer, because I actually did. I had a $3,000 computer working back home for Arlington Community Schools, and I put a water bottle in my backpack with this $3,000 laptop. And the keyboard itself was so advanced that it could not be separated from the screen. It came with the screen. So if you mess up the board, it's all done. And so the last day I have work, Tyler Hill, he's my, my mentor, and I'm his intern, and I go into his office and we're doing final paperwork or whatever. And he tells me that, Jake, we didn't want to tell you to your last day, but you owe $3,000 to Arlington Community Schools.
That's terrible.
And the thing is, I believed him. And keep in mind, they had never paid me anything for working for them. It was their first time, so I was their intern without pay, and I worked like a recreation job. Like, I was not making any money.
Now they make money, right?
Yeah, they do make money now.
Does that make you sad at all?
No, it's okay. It's okay. But he basically told me to my face I owed $3,000 to ACS, and I absolutely freaked out. So we had a close call here before we hit record, but we're all good now. So, but I can say that I have had that happen before. So
that is sad.
Have you ever had anything similar happen, like a big piece of technology that was a lot of money and you almost completely destroyed it?
Yes. So I'm a photographer and videographer, but my backpack, the zippers, it has two zippers, like to put all your gear inside of it, and they're on the sides, right? So I didn't realize that I left one of the sides unzipped, and I picked up my backpack off the floor, I put it on my back, and I started walking up the stairs, and then my camera just falls out. And my camera, it's pretty expensive, and then also the lens is almost just as expensive. So that was probably the biggest technology scare that I've ever had. And you know how much I love my camera and how scared I must have been. So that is definitely the biggest mistake I've made.
How scared were you when that happened?
I might have prayed before I picked up my camera. Like I was terrified. Like, have you seen the movie Jesus Revolution?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
They pray and the car starts working.
Yes.
You know, that was me with the camera. You know.
So do you think that camera lens could have been shattered and God fixed it before you picked it up?
There would be no way of knowing, but all I'm gonna say is, camera lens is just a big piece of glass. You know, in some plastic. So
Gotcha.
You never know.
Follow-up question for you: do you think God answers those kind of prayers?
Probably not.
Like, I put myself in a terrible spot. I didn't zip my backpack with expensive equipment. Does God answer that prayer when I make that mistake?
That's something I will ask him when I get to heaven.
I was listening to a comedian one time, and he was like, his name's John Christ, and he was basically saying like things that he would never pray for. He said one time one of his family members called him, and they lived like Fort Lauderdale and Florida, whatever, like right by the beach. And they said, "Hey, we got a prayer request. There's a hurricane coming in, and we just want y'all to pray for our house's safety." And John's like, "I ain't praying for that. God told you to build your house on the rock, and you went and built it on the beach. Why would I pray for that when you're deliberately disobeying?" Like, I've always found that conversation interesting.
So what do you think about that?
I ain't praying for that. Don't ask me to pray for something that stupid. That's my thing. I think you should know if it's a stupid request before you tell me, but I don't know.
So you don't think we should bring all problems to God?
Don't bring your selfish issues to other people. That's what I would say.
Gotcha.
That's what I would say. Maybe the hurricane would help them learn from their mistake. So maybe that would be more influential than actually helping them in that situation. But
Wow. Well, let's kind of get into what we're talking about today, which I think is leadership.
absolutely, leadership. What are some red flags in leadership? That's one thing that I came across in I'm reading Jeremiah right now. So I'm kind of splitting between Jeremiah and Psalm every day. And one thing it talked about, I think it was Jeremiah 42 or 43. It talked about these leaders that basically saved all of Judah that had not been taken to Babylon, and they saved them from this guy named Ishmael. Ishmael was taken away. He had just assassinated the current king or whatever. And I thought, oh my goodness, dude, congratulations to these awesome guys that are saving all these people. Like, these are men of God. These are great people. So basically later in the story, they go and talk to Jeremiah and they say, hey, we want to know what God has for us next. Anything that God lays out on the table, we're all for, all for. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what men of God to be able to lead these people, to save them from death, save them from poverty, and then want to know what God has for them next. So Jeremiah takes 10 days to pray about it, talk to the Lord, seek wise counsel with him, things like that. Comes back and gives them the answer that they don't need to go to Egypt. They need to stay in Judah. And they basically say, Jeremiah, you're lying. You are wrong. We will never do that. We are going to Egypt no matter what. So it raised a lot of questions in my reading. I was like, I thought these men were solid guys, and they were going to follow God no matter what. But it seems like Jeremiah knew from the beginning that they weren't going to do that. So that's just the question I raised. How do you notice those red flags in leadership? Because if I'm one of those people in Judah and he saves me from Ishmael, I'm like, dude, I'm going to give my life to this guy. He saved my life. He's leading me in the right direction. He wants to see what God's will is for my life and things like that and my safety. But what are those things that really separate you from being a good leader into an actual bad leader? And it's hard to notice those things. It was really tough for me reading that passage. So
I have no idea how you got that out of that passage. There's no way I would have thought about any of that. Like, what made you think about that specific question rather than just taking the story for what it is?
Well, honestly, like when you decide to truly dive deep and understand the characters, I mean, they're real people. They're real people. Yes, they lived thousands of years ago, but they have the same problems, the same issues. And I genuinely thought, I was like, oh, wow, God said he's going to, help Judah out. And he's going to help the people of Judah out, and he's going to lead them prosperity in, a couple of decades down the line. And it's good to see that God has men in this city, in this country, that are leading them to the promise. But when someone looks so good on the outside and their heart is corrupt on the inside, and they're willing to lead themselves down the wrong path. But also one thing that I'm assuming we're going to get into is that sin loves company. And those people were willing to lead them, all those people, into what they directly knew God was not having for them. So, sometimes I like to reflect on how it applies to me, and I'm just like, man, I've had some leaders in my life, and I've seen leaders in the past, especially in the Southern Baptist Convention, that have looked so good on the outside. In reality, they're going through a ton of stuff that they are so prideful about, they're narcissistic about, that they don't want to give up. And that just makes them a terrible shepherd of their flock. So you really just got to dive deep and try to understand rather than taking it for face value, because that's what the Bible is meant for,
Yeah, I get it. What is like one, we don't have to say names or anything, and it doesn't even have to be from church. What is like one example from your life where you've seen kind of like some bad, maybe some leadership that just kind of threw you the wrong way?
Yeah, I'm asking you this question after too. But for me, as I said earlier, the Southern Baptist Convention, I grew up Baptist. We go to a Baptist church right now currently. And when you're a kid, it's hard to describe this, but when you grew up in the church, you always assumed that the leaders that you had, especially the young ones, were just the coolest, the most awesome guys, the most pure guys. They're willing to run through a brick wall for you. And you paint them as this perfect picture. And when the report, I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago, maybe less than that, came out of all the Southern Baptist Convention workers or pastors, I don't remember what it was, that had committed sexual assault or that had sexual misconduct with minor, I think it was minors specifically, but it may have been just cheating on their wives. The list was hundreds, maybe thousands. I don't remember exactly. But it was so bad to the point where for a week or two, I was just looking at every leader in my life and I was like, what are they hiding? You know, like these guys I listened to, I put my trust in those words that they had spoken. I just grabbed onto, right? I'm thankful that none of the leaders that I directly had growing up had any issues with those things. I'm very lucky. But I know a lot of people haven't had that story, and it's crowded them out of the church. So, and it's damaged their view on Christianity. So those have been the leaders that I've seen that have just completely ruined it for themselves and for other people. But what about you?
Okay, so I'm actually going to steal an example from a awesome show, The Office.
Mm-hmm.
You ever heard of The Office?
Great show. Great show. We actually watched all 9 seasons very quickly.
So, and also, do you know who Will Ferrell is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Big
so
fan.
Will Ferrell comes onto the show, and he is Michael Scott. He takes Michael Scott's position for like 2 days, and then he ends up going to the hospital. But
It's a great episode.
it really is. But so basically, he comes in, and during these 2 days, he makes this like inner circle with basically the people that he likes in the office, and he only talks to them about things, and he just leaves everyone else out. And like people were really, really upset about it. Um, so I think that's kind of a good example that can kind of lead into other things, like
Mhm.
maybe there's some youth pastors out there that maybe favor some students more than the others, give them more opportunities to do stuff. And so I think that's going to be kind of my favorite example of a bad leader.
Yeah, that's good, dude. That's good. It seems like everyone from the office that led that company was just was just in shambles.
Who was your favorite leader?
From the show?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of a hard question because they all had their issues. You know, Michael was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Will Ferrell, he was really weird and he basically died in 2 days. Robert California, very interesting dude.
And then that redhead lady led
That was weird.
took Andy's
What's her
spot.
name?
I don't even remember, dude. I have no
I forgot
idea.
about that because Andy went on a sailboat for like 3 months. So you know that show is a perfect example of bad leaders.
Yes, of what not to do. Absolutely. I don't know, man. I honestly didn't really like anyone from that show. It made it hard to, I don't know, I guess, like the storyline because everybody had major morality issues.
So then why did you like the show so much if you didn't like any of the people?
I didn't like the storyline. I just liked the jokes and the dry humor. So yeah, don't follow any of the leaders from that show whatsoever. So you talked about D'Angelo and his inner circle and favoritism, right? I think favoritism is a big problem when it comes to leadership. That's honestly a red flag for me. And I've seen a lot of people switch churches because of that, right? They feel like they're not getting the right opportunities and God leads them somewhere else, right? So what is maybe another thing that you would say when I see this tendency in a leader, it makes me want to back away a little bit?
Pride. Pride is a big problem in churches, especially when it comes to leaders. I feel like pride is something that attacks like pastors so much because if you let pride kind of sneak into your life as a pastor, then you're not going to want to listen to anyone except yourself. So I think pride is a great example
Absolutely.
of something to look out for.
Absolutely. We were listening to a sermon on Sunday by a guy who came and spoke at the church that we go to, and he was talking about spiritual gifts, and he was openly saying, and I loved how he said this, that my gift of speaking, my gift of organizing good conversations with people is no better than a grandma who sits on the side of the road and bakes cookies and invites kids to come to her door and shares the gospel with them, right? Everybody has different talents, different gifts. But when it comes to pastors that are in leadership like that, and this is honestly something that, frightens me a little bit because I struggle with pride and also I feel called to be a pastor, is will I ever crowd out God to a point where I'm only listening to my voice? And that is a scary thought, and I never want to even get close to that. That's why pride needs to be hit at the root before it grows into something that you can't even control, that you can't even recognize you have a problem with. That's what pride does. It makes you listen to only yourself, and yourself is a terrible leader. And I think another thing to add on to pride, and I think this guy in the Bible had a lot to do with both of these issues, is Saul. And Saul dealt with a lot of jealousy. I think jealousy is another thing that people don't really talk about with bad leadership. And Saul, when David was named the next king by Samuel, Saul got extremely jealous when he realized that David was getting all the attention, when he was getting all the praise, when he was going out and winning wars and leading in those battles. And Saul was just there, right? And he went on multiple sprees to try to kill this guy, the guy that God had already said is going to be the next king. And so when it comes to jealousy and pride, those things will drive you to do things that you could not even imagine. And Saul ended up dying in war because he committed suicide. He said, kill me. I can't go back after this. I can't face myself, because he had denied God so many times and listened to himself. So those things are very dangerous, and it changes a lot of people, especially in ministry. And it's definitely a scary thought, and something that I see as a huge red flag.
Yeah, definitely. What do you think is kind of another red flag? And also, actually, let's go back a little bit. What is the best way to be able to see pride, like at its root? How do you know if that's something you even struggle with? Like how?
It's a good thought. Are you talking about, like, let's say if you struggle with it and I notice it in you, or are you talking about me self-reflecting?
I guess kind of like you self-reflecting, like
Okay.
based on your story, what made you realize that you were actually struggling with pride? Like how did you figure that out, and how are you trying to overcome that?
I think a lot of it boils down to what voice am I listening to? And I feel like I talk about this every week, but it's a big part of my testimony. Like when I was first called to ministry back in August, I said that I was going to pray about it. I said that I was going to listen to the Lord. This is last year, so not this past August. I said I was going to pray about it. In reality, I knew that I wasn't going to give that up. It was an idol in my life, and I said, my pride and my sports broadcasting ability and my pride and other things in my life that I'm not willing to give away, allowing that to grow ultimately hurt my relationships with other people. And God allowed me to hit rock bottom in order to hear from him. And that's the only way I would, right? So if you are, I feel like for true Christians, and I could be speaking out of line here and let me know. I feel like for true Christians, if you look back on moments that you were being prideful and disobedient, you can point to the exact moments where God told you to do something and you said no. I can do that throughout my story, especially for the last 2 years. I can point back to the moments, I can point back to the prayers where I knew that I was stepping out of line and being prideful in what I said and what I did. And I think for a true Christian that genuinely wants to change, you have to get to a point that is so low in your self-esteem to realize that God is so gracious to even allow you to take another breath, right? Allow you to take another breath. And I think humility is a big part. Attack pride with humility, right? And just lowering your self-image to realize that God is all you need and he's all you got.
That's really good.
So that would be my thing. But
Yeah.
I know you've dealt with pride in the past, especially in the gym, and that was a big thing for you before you got saved. So what was, I guess, that turning point? We kind of talked about this with the gym conversation. What was that turning point for you when you got saved, where you realized, like, oh my goodness, I can't view myself in this light because this is not only hurting me, but it's hurting other people at the same time?
I mean, for me, I guess it was something that I kind of knew. I think I already knew it was wrong before I was even a Christian. Like, I knew that focusing on yourself so much that you're hurting other people, like, that's wrong. Like, we know right from wrong, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like when I got saved, it was just really easy for me to kind of let go of all those things, because it wasn't something that kind of gradually came in after I got saved. Like, you were saved when you were 6 or 5, something like that. So
5.5.
5.5. So I feel like those things just kind of grow on you, like when you were a kid before you maybe even had those struggles. And those were things that I struggled with my whole life, basically. And then once I became a Christian, it just kind of went away because it was a turning point. And I just think that's the difference, is basically when the Holy Spirit came into my life, those convictions were instant, and I think it just kind of slowly built up for you with your story, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And I love the beauty in that. Like, both of us have completely different stories, completely different scenarios, and both of us still struggle with the same things. And both of us still have to repent of the same thing. So that completely eliminates pride right there, right? Because both of us has gone through the same thing. So that's one hard part when it comes to this conversation is recognizing the root of the issue. Like I was listening to a video the other day. I think someone sent it to me over Instagram, but it was basically talking about how we like cutting grass, for example. And there's one weed that always comes up in the exact same spot in the yard, and you just cut over it. You cut over it, and you cut over it, and it's gonna come back. Why? Because you haven't nailed it at the root. And it'll come to a point where that thing is going to continue to grow. And that's where the hard part is when what I really struggle with is seeing those tendencies start to be more apparent in leaders that I love. And that's one hard part when it comes to that is, man, I hate that pride, like you said, with pastors just sneaks in so easily, because they think that they're better than everybody else.
Yeah.
So that's a hard part with ministry.
That is really sad. But I mean, as sad as it is, pride isn't the only thing that pastors struggle with and leaders struggle with. So what is something else that you kind of see from either ministries that you've been to or just online, stuff like that? What's something that you see when it comes to leadership that you're just like, ooh, that just kind of rubs you the wrong way?
It's a good question. One thing that I've struggled with, especially listening to sermons, I think I really have a hard time when I hear speakers gossip in their sermons. Does that make any sense? Like when people talk about people from their past in so specific ways when they're not even there to defend themselves. And when I'm in a discipleship group or anything like that, and I'm not talking like specifically I can name a person, but when I'm just in a sermon or I hear pastors talking and things like that, and I hear them gossip about someone else, I'm just like, gossip is a community killer. And if you want to cultivate a good community, especially of young people, then why are you talking about people behind their back? And that's one thing that's always rubbed me the wrong way. If I ever hear a leader talk about someone like that, I don't like that stuff. I really don't.
That makes a lot of sense. I wonder if that has any effect on like gossip within the church community, like especially like youth ministries. Like I feel like most youth ministries have. I mean, I hope that there is some really solid youth ministries that don't have gossip going around, but I wonder if any of that comes from the pastor talking about other people on stage.
Yeah. I don't know, man. That's a great question.
I don't know, because
That's a great
gossip
question.
is also something that's really just
That's
like,
common.
It's very common, especially like in high school. But I don't know. It's just kind of a thought I had.
Yeah, that might be true. I don't know. And I know the sins of the fathers pass on to the sons or whatever. I don't know about pastors and youth kids.
Yeah, but
maybe.
I feel like you kind of just become the people you surround yourself with.
That's very, very true.
And especially if
Very
it's someone, if someone that's leading you is doing something, what would make you think it's wrong?
It's true.
So
That's a really good point. That is a really good point. And one leader that does that a lot is by the name of Joel Osteen, right? And honestly, I'm of the viewpoint that his prosperity gospel messages are being viewed by millions of people live and millions of people every single day. And he's leading a ton of people astray. And people don't know it. They don't. It's like a shepherd allowing the flock to go out and die, right? And that's just one thing that I hate is that he's filling the minds of those people in that congregation and the world that are listening to him, seeking biblical information and biblical wisdom, and he's just feeding them nonsense and prosperity gospel. I know you have opinions on him too, but that's just one leader that I don't know, I've never really looked up to at all, even though he has a following.
yeah, and I feel like that's probably the biggest reason why. I guess there's two reasons why people follow someone like Joel Osteen. For one, it is the influence. If everyone else is listening to this one person, then they have to be right. That's just kind of one viewpoint. And then there's also people that just don't want to hear anything other than what he's saying. So I think those are kind of the big problems when it comes to people like Joel Osteen. And I'm sorry if anyone out there listens to Joel Osteen, but after doing some research and listening to some of his stuff, I don't see how he is a biblical Bible teaching pastor. So.
Yeah. And the reason that's such an important thing to say is as I said earlier with the shepherd and the flock, the leaders will be judged more harshly. They will, like with the Pharisees. Jesus said this generation will be punished for all the sins in the world. I think that's what it said, like leading up to that point. And the reason is because the Pharisees were leading so many people astray by their good works philosophy. And in reality, deep within themselves, they were prideful, they were narcissistic, and they did things for show, right? And those things led so many people down because they saw the Pharisees as the example. They saw them giving extraordinary amounts of money in the temple and things like that. And they said, wow, if I'm not that, I don't know who I am. And that was just one thing that always rubbed me off when Jesus talked to them, is just how dangerous that is because, I mean, whose fault is it when the sheep go astray and they die? It's not the sheep's fault. They don't know any better. It's the person leading the flock, right? It's the shepherd's fault because he allowed them to go astray, right? So leaders will be judged more harshly. And I fear for Joel Osteen, if his gospel is truly not right and it's errant, that he's leading so many people astray and the blood's going to be on his hands. And that's why this conversation is so vital to have, because leadership makes or breaks a lot of people, and God expects a lot out of his leaders, and he will equip the called. And that's one thing that's, it's hard to fathom when you see so many people fall away and doing bad things in leadership.
That's something that kind of brings up another question for me. So when it comes to people like Joel Osteen, when we see there's so many things that they're obviously doing wrong, and we know that they're leading people astray, and it says that God will, like, they're going to be judged more harshly. What does that actually mean if they are a true Christian? Because Christians are going to go to heaven. Right? So what exactly does that mean? I don't actually understand that.
It talks about in James 2, faith without works is dead. And when you have people that look so good on the outside, but you don't know if they're truly preaching the right gospel, you have to go back to the origin. Are they saved or are they not? Let's say he is saved. Let's say a bunch of people that are, people that have made mistakes in leadership are saved. It talks about how people will barely make the cut and they'll smell like smoke in heaven. So they'll make it, but they will obviously be different from the rest. But the Bible also says that the lukewarm will be spit out of his mouth. That says that in Revelation. I don't know if that means spitting out in the slums of heaven or it means spitting them to hell. But either way, I don't want to be on the other end of God spitting me out of his mouth. And that's one thing that I've always struggled with, is seeing people be satisfied with lukewarmness. I've never understood that. And yes, I've settled for that in my life many times where I've said no to God and not fully surrendered. And I'm sure that'll happen again, although I pray it doesn't. That I'm going to live a lukewarm lifestyle. I'm going to fight against it with all I can. And that's just one thing that's always rubbed me the wrong way, is when people are satisfied with that, especially in leadership.
That's like it's scary and also like fascinating to me that people that may not even be Christians are pastors. Like, obviously, I'm not saying that Joel Osteen isn't a Christian. Like, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I'm sure only God really knows that. But
he's the only one who can.
That's just like really, I guess it is more scary than fascinating, but
yeah, definitely.
Man. So there's going to be, there's so many people being led astray and they don't even know it. Like, that is sad. And so when it talks about God judging fairly, what do you think about that? Because if these people are being led astray, would that really be their fault? How would God judge them?
Man, God is indescribable, so I can't even begin to describe really who God is. Nonetheless, how he judges other people, that concept is a complete foreign idea to me. I know that God judges fairly. I know that he does. So when it comes to people who live in a random country that they're never going to hear Christ, but God says the heavens declare his glory and that people can be saved through that, I know that person's going to be judged fairly. I don't know what that means, what that looks like, but they have to know Jesus Christ. I do know that. It talks about that in Romans 10:9. If you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that Jesus is Lord, you will be saved. I don't know. I wish I knew.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question. I didn't expect you to actually
huge question.
Know an answer to it, but I don't know. That just came up in my mind.
Yeah, it's tough though. And one thing I did want to point out is we can talk about bad leadership all day. But one thing we have to know is what good leadership looks like.
Yes.
And there's none better than Jesus Christ. And one of the craziest things that I've ever seen in the Bible that he did was, obviously there's the resurrection, the crucifixion, and all those things, and resisting temptation for 40 days. But washing the disciples' feet.
Okay.
Like, can you even imagine doing that? Like, we did that at church my senior year, and we washed our friends' feet, but they were nothing as disgusting as these guys were. It talks about in John 13:12. This is the conversation he had. After washing their feet, he put on his robe again and sat down and asked, "Do you understand what I was doing? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, because that's what I am. And since I, your Lord and your teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done to you." So that is an example of Jesus humbling himself to the point to become a servant leader. The God of the universe, the one who created the heavens and the, oh my goodness, I can't even begin to start on the heavens. Like, the one who created all those things is becoming a servant and serving the ones that are constantly saying no to him. And I can't even believe that. That's the gospel in itself. And Jesus shows us what it looks like to be a leader: sacrificial, loving, and willing to humble themselves to become a servant. And that's ultimately the example that we have. And in that mindset, in that curriculum, there is absolutely no room for pride, narcissism, lust, selfishness, none of it. No favoritism whatsoever. Because he's literally taking down himself to lift up others in a special way.
Yeah, I don't think there's a better example than that. Wow.
It's tough, though. It's tough to think I need to be a leader and also pair that with the fact that I need to put myself below others. Like, that's just such a foreign thing that Jesus brought in, and it's so hard to actually fathom that information, you know?
So, what would be the equivalent of a leader to Jesus washing the disciples' feet? So, what does that look like now in modern days? Because, I don't think people really wash each other's feet. But what's like a good example of what that could look like?
Man, I love that you asked that question. A God-fearing, humble, sacrificial husband. I think that is the best example, because Jesus and the church are related to the bride of Christ and the groom. And Jesus came down for the bride, and humbled himself and laid down his life for the bride. And the church. And I just think that's a beautiful example of what it looks like. When I see a dad, like my dad is a great example of this, I'm gonna be honest. Kevin Stute, baby. And other dads who are leading out that way. They're leading their families, they're leading their wives in such a humble way. They're doing their work 9 to 5 on the weekdays, but when they come home, it is all about the family. It's all about doing what is best for them. And that's something my dad's taught me so well, is how to be humble and how to be a servant. I can tell you how many times I was supposed to take out the dog or take out the trash in high school, and my dad did it because I was late. I was home late. Like, just things like that. I had forgotten, right? Just taking the servant leadership role is just so fascinating to me, and I could not understand it, and I still don't know how to live that out like they do.
Well, what's a good example of, like, other than your dad, like another leader in your life that has just served you in a way that's so sacrificial that you feel like you can never even do the same back?
Mr. Eric Heathcock, absolutely great example. Like, you met him, like, just kind of describe his tendencies and how he is.
Man, I wish I wasn't so late to the group. I do. How many years did you get to spend with him?
4.
So he was your discipleship leader for 4 years.
He was my Sunday school teacher for 4 to 5 years, and then he was my discipleship leader for a year and a half.
Gotcha. So, how many months did I even get to be with Eric? Maybe like 6?
5 or 6, yeah. Man.
5 or 6 months, I saw Mr. Eric spend just countless hours just serving us, serving the church. Like, it's unimaginable how awesome he is. Like, I just can't even imagine, like, how much time he spent that we didn't even see preparing to lead us. Like, it's just mind blowing.
On top of pouring into us on Sundays and throughout the week.
And working a full-time job.
Yes, a really good full-time job at FedEx too. And playing disc golf like every day. And having a wife and kids.
It doesn't make sense to me, but he loves it. And he doesn't do it. That's another thing when we talk about, like, red flags. Let's talk about, like, green flags, and we'll use Mr. Eric as an example.
Yeah.
Everything he did was sacrificial. There was nothing he could have gotten out of leading us except for the joy that comes from the Lord when he does that. So I think that's a green flag. What's another green flag?
Pouring into young people, I think, is one. And that's just one thing that he did. And I know we kind of said that already, but willing to pour into the next generation and not be so focused on yourself is such a sacrificial thing. And for you guys out there who don't know who that is, I assume a lot of you don't. He is basically just an example of what it looks like to be humble and servant-hearted and sacrificial, like we all said. And he's that person. I assume a lot of you can think of that person. Hopefully it's your parents, because you get to see them every day. But yeah, I just love that. Being willing to pour out your knowledge to someone else and not do it in a prideful standpoint is just so special. And there was another pastor that I know that I got to get to know before I left. His name was Derek Ewalt. And he's one of the guys that I look up to extremely. And he's in a pastor role. He's actually at the point where a ton of people are asking him, are you going to go to another church? Are you going to go pastor another church? You're so gifted. And he's like, just listen to the Lord. He's like, Lord hadn't told me that yet. Lord hadn't told me that at all. Other people can talk me up as much as they want, but I'm not going to let those things create pride in my life. And I just think that's so fascinating that the world is not changing the way he views himself. And that's such a common thing, even on the other side of the spectrum with depression and anxiety and things like that. Not allowing the world to affect you and truly living for an audience of one is a sign of a good leader. And I think you will know pretty quick if you get to know someone well, if that person has good tendencies or bad tendencies. It's very rare that someone you know that well is actually going through something you'd have no idea about. And that's a good thing. It challenges us to really get to know others around us in a deeper way. But it obviously does stink when a leader that you thought you know is those red flags actually led to them not being a good person. So,
Ooh, I want to bring up another red flag since we said that there was like no selfishness when it came to Eric. Let's talk about greed for a second. So, actually, I'm going to go back to Joel Osteen. You know, I don't actually know where all of his money comes from, because I've seen some videos saying different things, saying it comes from the donations that are given to his church, and some people say it's only from his books. But like, what do you think about pastors like that spend so much money on themselves, on things that they just worldly things? Like, is that a red flag, or is that just a sign? Is that just like a blessing? What is that?
it's a good question. That's one thing that is so hard to know, is like, I 100% believe and know, I can say that I know that you are a Christian and you're going to heaven. However, there is no way that I can know the inner workings of every part of your heart and your mind. So when it comes to things like that, I can make a good guess. I can make an inference, per se, on if they're doing it for the right reasons or not, if they're doing it to invite missionaries to live in their house, if they're doing it to have banquets where they can actually share the gospel with people, if they're using it for good, even if they are using it for good, if their heart's in the wrong spot, that shows that their intentions are wrong, which shows that their heart is actually in that way evil, and it's allowing greed to control them. But again, it's so hard to know someone's specific heart when it comes to those things. It's such a difficult topic.
Well, I can't ask for an answer to a question that doesn't actually have an answer.
That only the Lord can
Yeah.
know. And that's one thing I will not be placing myself into. That's God's thing, and I can't even begin to fathom having to go with that.
Is there any other red flags you think that we have missed?
I don't think so off the top of my head. I think there definitely is, that we're just not hitting on. But I think it's very important for us to say, as college students, as people that are trying our best to lead out in every way in our life, that not only are we not experts on this topic, but everything that we've talked about today, I have struggled with at one point completely. And these things are going to happen to every leader, because Satan is going to try to attack those that are living out what God wants for them. Like Job. Like Job was living a life that he wasn't even talking about God. He was giving his all and everything. And Satan said, no, I'm going to make sure that he doesn't do this, right? He has the wrong heart. I'm going to show you God. So he's going to go after the ones that are living after the Lord truly and wholeheartedly. So people are going to struggle with this. So don't think that we're coming after those who are struggling with this, and don't think that you're a bad leader if you are dealing with these tendencies. But the importance is to have a repentant heart, a surrendered heart. Don't bottle these feelings inside, because if you do that, they're only going to grow even more and more. It's going to become that weed that you don't cut from the root. And that's a scary thought. That's a scary thought for me. I want to go into ministry. I really do. And I've got to make sure I cut these at the root now, not having to do it when I'm in that pastor role and having to suffer the consequences for that. I don't want to go into those situations already having everything cleared up. So yeah, being fully surrendered is a tough thing, but it's worth it. And that way you make sure that you're leading your flock the right way and you're not leading them astray.
That is so good, Mr. Jacob. Well, thank you guys so much for listening in to this week's episode on leadership. If you have any questions or you think we said anything wrong, just let us know down in the comments or in our DMs. And also, if you do not know Jesus, if Jesus is not your Lord and Savior, send us a message. Talk to us about it. We would love more than anything to talk to you and just be able to kind of have that conversation with you. So if you guys are listening on Apple Podcasts, just a little heads up, we have a video version of the podcast available on Spotify and on YouTube, so you don't have to, you don't have to switch over to Spotify. You don't have to join the dark side.
You can see how good Chris's hair looks every episode. So
you suck.
you look great today, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
You look really good.
I like your jacket.
It's been good to look at you the whole time.
All right. All right. Things are getting a little bit weird here in the King of Hearts studio. So thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we will see you back here next week.
Peace.